Now, Newsnight has seen new figures which point to what could be a significant reduction in the amount of social housing that can be built over the next decade. The bill to make council and housing association properties fire safe under the new building safety regulations is coming in at an estimated £18 billion, which means less money to be spent on increasing housing elsewhere. As Lewis Goodall reports, there are already developments that now will not go ahead because of that shortfall.
The building safety crisis is accelerating. With each passing day, more people in more places hear that they're affected. But it isn't just individual homeowners who are having to count the cost. And that's because the chill wind of this scandal is now being felt in the social housing sector, which provides millions of homes to some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Indeed, this programme understands that the total cumulative cost to both bits of the social housing sector, i.e. housing associations and local authorities respectively, could be some £18 billion in the coming years. £18 billion effectively to rebuild many of the buildings they already have, rather than building new homes to some of the most vulnerable people in our country. So Jeremy, tell me a little bit about this building.
So this is Alexandra House. It's an 80-bed service for vulnerable homeless people.
Evolve Housing is a housing association in Croydon. At Alexandra House, they provide social housing for people about to be made homeless. For fire safety reasons, including cladding, it is now in the process of having to be rebuilt.
So the total cost is £2.5 million, at least £2.5 million. And at the minute, we are having to fund that total cost from money set aside for a new housing development. So there's a serious risk that that new development will never be built.
So you had a new housing development planned for similarly vulnerable people?
Yes, the housing development that we want to build is intended to provide 60 new homes for vulnerable homeless people. So that would be homeless families, young people and other single homeless people with support needs, very similar to the people who live here at Alexandra House.
Evolve's total bill is nearly £5 million for 4 buildings in its portfolio with cladding problems and the like. Its turnover is £13 million, and housing associations can now access relatively little of the itself limited funding available to private leaseholders, so largely they have to meet it out of their own pockets.
If the government doesn't step in, the money for this remediation work will be diverted away from building much needed new affordable homes, but also from investing in our existing homes as well.
But I suppose the government might say, well look, housing associations, usually the freeholders in this case, they may well have been involved. They should have been involved to some degree in the construction of these buildings, therefore you should absorb some of the cost.
Housing associations are not-for-profit charities. We exist to provide homes for people on the lowest incomes in this country. Housing associations did not build these buildings. And what we've since found with this absolute crisis is a failure in construction and a failure in some of the products, including flammable cladding. Now, that is not a housing association's fault, it's certainly not a social resident's fault, and it's not a leaseholder's fault. And that's why we need the government to step in, to fund the upfront costs of building safety and to recoup that from those responsible.
Survey data from the National Housing Federation, seen exclusively by Newsnight, shows what the impact of all of this could be. Of the 106 housing associations to reply, 61 have fire remediation problems, cladding or otherwise, despite them being signed off at the time. It's estimated that the cost to put those things right is some £10 billion, which we're told would mean that nearly 1 in 10 housing association homes, or nearly 13,000 properties which would have been built over the next 5 years, won't be. The Local Government Association have given us the cost for councils in similar circumstances, around £8 billion, making a total of an estimated £18 billion cost for providers of social housing. Even if the total cost comes to be substantially less than either housing associations or local authorities estimate, it would still be a big drain on revenues, inevitably affecting some of the poorest people and places. In Barking and Dagenham, they have 7,000 on the council house waiting list alone. And many of their buildings under 18 metres, the cut-off height for government support, have fire remediation problems which need to be paid for.
I do housing for London, and we reckon there's about 1,500 properties that are below 18 metres that none of this would actually cover, which is a real concern for local government.
1,500 properties.
Yeah, 1,500 properties. That's not individual, that's buildings with homes in them. So think how many homes that would be.
So we're talking about thousands and thousands.
Tens
and
of
thousands.
thousands, yeah.
But someone watching this, perhaps a minister watching this, might say, well, hang on a minute. You know, you're the local authority. Your part sometimes have the responsibility for signing off these buildings, being involved in these buildings. Sometimes these are your buildings. Don't you have some of the responsibility here?
And again, some of that may be true, but it was based on the legislation put forward by national government. That legislation is now changing, so the government has to give us the ability to be able to develop what we need to develop to keep people safe. So we're asking in the spending review for this to be looked at.
Beyond the building safety crisis, we're in a wider housing crisis with millions waiting for an affordable home. The danger is that the former makes the latter worse still.
Lewis Goodall with that report. Well, in response to our piece, a spokesperson from the Department of Housing and Community said, we will not compromise on building safety. Building owners must make buildings safe. The £5 billion Building Safety Fund is providing support to housing associations facing financial difficulties due to remediation costs, and the new Secretary of State is looking afresh at work in this area. Additionally, we're investing £12 billion to help councils and housing associations provide houses to those in need.